We're welcoming Jordan, aka Grandson, back to Loudwire Nights this evening. And last time we spoke, you had just released the EP Modern Tragedy Volume 1. Bloodwater, still in my top 25 most played playlist, but a Modern Tragedy Volume 2 is here. So it's time to talk about that. Although I want to start with Woodstock because I know that performing at Woodstock's 50th anniversary is extra special for you because your father attended the original festival and also because of the message behind the event, peace and love. So I'm just curious, who would you have loved to have seen in 69?
Wow. But what an intro. I'm here now. We're doing it. First off, thanks for having me back. I appreciate the support with Bloodwater in Volume 1, and I'm really excited with the new music that's come out and how it's been received. I can't wait for Woodstock. It's pretty unbelievable. It's definitely surreal for me. So much of my experience as a musician and as an artist is shaped by my father's experience being a young guy in his 20s making music, traveling around America. When he was 20 years old, he was on his way to Woodstock. He had been all hyped up. Him and his friends had been listening to all the bands on their way over. And unfortunately, these infamous mudslides that happened kind of took their car out and made them unable to finish their pilgrimage. So they had to turn around. And they never ended up getting to go to the show, and they had to just go home and get stoned and listen on their vinyl record player. And then 50 years later, my dad's going to be coming and watching his son play on stage. So it definitely means a lot to me, and it's reflective of really how crazy this journey's been, especially in the past year. As far as who I'd like to go back in time and see, there are definitely a couple. Obviously, Jimi Hendrix would be up there because of everything he stood for and the way that he would use his guitar to make statements, songs like Machine Gun and his kind of interpretation of the Star Spangled Banner. I think those things are just so cool, and he's just badass. I would love to watch him. But there's another live at Woodstock performance when I was a kid, like I had illegally downloaded on Limewire or something. It was a band called 10 Years After, and they had a live performance of their song I'm Going Home, which is like kind of like an up-tempo blues song, but with like the most gnarly guitar solo of all time, starting it off. So I would love to see that happen live too.
What do you think of the 2019 lineup?
I think it's unbelievable. I think it's a cool mesh of new artists and old artists. I'm biased because I get to watch Santana and Robert Plant play on the same day as me, so I think it's great. They asked me to play it, so I think that's awesome. And I think it's really interesting that there's a notable absence of DJs and electronic music. I'm a fan of electronic music. I don't feel one way or another about it. I do understand how a lot of fans might have expressed that to do a lineup with a lot of electronic music might somehow be so antithetical to what Woodstock stood for or something, but I don't feel one way or another about it. I do find it interesting, though, and I think it's refreshing to see a festival committed to rock and roll and committed to whether there's a couple hip-hop artists as well, but artists with some sort of message behind them.
As an ex-DJ or a DJ that you were, that is something you would pick up on. That's an interesting point. Let's talk a little bit about the new EP, A Modern Tragedy Volume 2. We just started playing the single Apologize on this show. So can you talk to us a bit about the song and the message behind it and what inspired it?
The song I had began writing before any other songs I had been put out as Grandson. And I used to play it in little dive bars in Hollywood. I would do these open mic nights to like get my guitar chops up and build my confidence. And I would play to these empty rooms. And it just became this anthem for me because I was in a really indecisive point in my life. My music career wasn't really going the way I expected it to. I was just getting out of a relationship that didn't end the way I expected it to. And I had written Apologize really as a reminder to myself that if you're doing the work, then you have to just let go of regret and just go with it. And it's been really cool to see how many different kinds of people have gravitated towards this message of, I'm not going to apologize for who I am. So it began like that, and it was just like our white whale for like years. Like we started picking it back up when Volume 1 was coming around, but we didn't get it sounding right. And then Volume 2 came around, we started working on it and couldn't get it quite right. Yeah, it kind of came together once we found what that riff after the chorus was going to be. And it was something like version 43 of the song that finally came out. But I think we're all happy that it found its home. And with a song like that, when you work that hard to crack it, at a certain point, I was like, if we don't get this song out soon, I'm going to lose my mind. I'm happy it doesn't know else.
It's so weird. Like sometimes you hear a musician say it was like divine intervention. The song just came through me. And then other times it's like, yeah, it was take 88, which is just nuts.
Yeah, sometimes I think that, at least I can't speak for anyone else's writing process, but for me, sometimes that lightning rod moment will happen, but it won't happen in the song's totality. It might just be inspiration for a guitar riff or just the concept of the song itself. But then when I'm sitting around waiting for that second burst of inspiration to flesh out the rest of the song or get the structure right, that's when you have to kind of roll up your sleeves and get the job done. And I really do think that with any creative ambition that someone might have, there's a certain amount of inspiration and divine intervention or whatever. But then there's another part of like showing up to work, and you have to keep tackling it, or you're going to let these dreams or ambitions just kind of be dreams and ambitions. So, sometimes it's just worth it. Other times it's not. I've had songs where I've desperately tried to make it work, so to speak, and it just I couldn't crack it. But that song was one that took a while. And interestingly enough, on Volume 1, the longest song to finish was actually Bloodwater. And that was another example of a song where I knew what I wanted it to be about, and I had the lyrics to the chorus, but everything else took what felt like a million different iterations and tries, and you have to challenge yourself. And it was like, well, let's just see if I can get it a little closer. And then you get that second burst of energy, and then you end up with a song that people seem to gravitate to. I can't explain it, but I'm very grateful for it.
And now we know how Grandson operates. All right, good to know. I want to talk about Dark Side, which seems to be a fan favorite if YouTube views are any indication. To me, I immediately thought of like Pearl Jam's Jeremy, but like a 2019 version. Obviously, the troubled student doesn't shoot himself, he shoots others. That song was put out in the early 90s. Obviously, it's gotten so much worse since. And it seems as if it is on your generation's shoulders to fix it. So how do you go from shedding light in a song? I feel like everybody's like, oh, you got to shed light on it. You got to shed light on it. So how do you go from shedding light to like fixing the problem? And of course, that's $1 million question.
Yeah, that is $1 million question. And absolutely, my manager brought up Jeremy and made me listen to it by Pearl Jam when we were working on Dark Side, and it definitely struck a chord with me. I think that the most valuable thing that we can get from people with music is their attention, and maybe you can extend that for more than the 15 minutes that our current relationship to outrage is accounting for. So, people get all fired up about the particular issue of the day, but there's just so much news and so much information to process that it's really hard to hold on to an issue long enough to see any meaningful change. And I think that our relationship to gun violence in particular, the way that people conflate any sort of meaningful reform with this notion of wanting to take people's guns, and I think that the way certain politicians think that by expressing their condolences or maybe getting on a call with the families, that somehow is enough, or when they trot out, don't politicize this tragedy, it's somehow disrespectful. It's like, well, if we can't politicize this tragedy, then how are we going to ever expect it not to happen again? I think with Dark Side and with Volume 2 in general, I came at it having just gotten off tour. When I wrote Volume 1, I think I had a much more clear idea of right and wrong with governance and policy. And I think Volume 1, I meant it to be this wake-up call for people to push my agenda, what I felt. Whereas with Volume 2, a lot of the things that I touch on, I don't really have as clear a sense of what we should do about it. All I know is that we should be upset, we should be angry, and these people should have more of a sense of urgency to try to fix what's going on here. And I say this on stage a lot. The line between good and evil is not outside of us. It's not behind a wall. It's not between us and some perverse kid. The line between good and evil, it runs through all of us. It runs through our relationship to that kid that's getting picked on. It lies between ourselves in how we respond to that sort of stimulus. So I just wanted to kind of humanize it in some way and make a song that was, on one hand, obviously what this person ends up doing is reprehensible, and I certainly don't relate or I don't mean to glorify it in any way, shape, or form. But it's also a song of, if you pick on somebody, sometimes like the dog bites back, so to speak.
Right. You seem like you have a good head on your shoulders. You know, you have a brain. You're not out there acting a fool. But I do wonder, because you sing about temptation on Fallin. So I wonder, has tour life ever brought out a side of you that you weren't exactly proud of? And I just watched that Motley Crue biopic, The Dirt, so it's probably seeping into this question.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that I try and use these spaces for better than worse. And I try and use the live performance as a cathartic place for my frustration. And when I'm struggling with my mental health, that I get to share this vulnerable experience with all these people. It is fun for me, but again, it's an incredibly enabling environment. I see people around me from other bands or from my own perspective who have to navigate what that attention provides people and the hierarchical relationship of power to the people around you, to fans, how you navigate that and how you maintain a healthy amount of perspective and keep reminding yourself that you're just another mortal, fallible human being, while also this other foot is like in rock star mode. It can be really difficult to navigate. So I've definitely had nights where I have sort of lapsed into more of a, I don't know, more of a degenerate, but I do think that that's important. I think it's healthy to acknowledge, and I frankly also believe that if you're going through a wide open phase in your life, it's not necessarily the end of the world to experiment, as long as you're responsible about it, as long as you don't overdo it. I think that some people never have those nights, and if you don't give yourself a chance to experience what the world has to offer, you might wake up one day much later in your life and resent yourself for not experimenting, resent the people in your life that you may view as holding you back. So I wouldn't say that I regret any of those nights that inspired the song Fallin, but I will say that I am making a conscious effort to not have too many of them on tour.
Makes sense, and I totally agree with that. I want to get two more quick questions in here. One being that you recently shared on social media that you were going off to contemplate the meaning of your existence, which kind of made me smile, and I wonder what you came up with.
Oh, man. Yeah, we had a day off the other day, and I ended up on taking some psychedelics and wandering around this beach in the middle of nowhere. And I don't know. I mean, there were times where I was reflecting on where I'm at and my relationship to the band and the crew and this unbelievable journey that we've found ourselves on. And I was thinking about Grandson and this identity that seems to be kind of building momentum so aggressively. And it kind of feels like me and every other kid I knew and know that just wants to make music and just wants to avoid a 9-to-5 without wading in the water. Like, if you've ever gone surfing, you know that a huge part of surfing is just sitting around waiting for a big wave. Mm-hmm. And I felt like we're all just kind of waiting around. And then at a certain point, I just kind of started paddling. I can't remember what inspired me or compelled me to start putting out music or start paddling, so to speak, but all of a sudden this like huge wave came from behind me. One of the things that's cool about surfing that I think relates to making music is that the momentum is generated outside of you, that there's this thing pushing you, which for me is these kids and this fandom and this enthusiasm. You all of a sudden have this huge swell propelling you, and now everyone's just kind of gawking at this, how big can this wave behind me get, and am I going to trip and mess it all up? So that was kind of me just, if you had, it wouldn't have looked or sounded very profound if you had seen me wandering around with my dilated pupils a couple days ago, but I felt a certain amount of responsibility that can feel overwhelming at times. It's like when you're playing a video game or something and you're hitting your high score, but you're not dead yet, and you're still going, like, wow, when is this going to be over? But I just feel so unbelievably grateful for what is happening, and I know that a lot of people would love to have this opportunity that I have, and I'm trying to meet that opportunity with deliberate effort, with intention, and with gratitude. And the more that I give to it, the more I seem to get from it. So I'm trying to do that, and especially I'm trying to build XX Resistance and build this nonprofit component to empower young people and to give young people that come to a show a feeling of agency over their lives. Because one thing that psychedelics did for me in my 20s was that they've made me feel that there's a certain malleability to the world around me, so to speak. Like I've felt that the rules of you have to be this person, you have to go get a job and finish school and do all these things, that those rules were made by somebody else, and that I'm free to navigate them however I choose and however they relate to me. But a lot of people don't have the privilege of feeling that control over their lives because they might not have a supportive system around them, because they might be held back financially, they might be held back by systems of oppression because of their skin color or their sexual orientation. So I feel that it is my responsibility to bring that feeling to people and make people feel like they can take back control over their lives and shake that bad enabling system around them. Which is a really long-winded answer, but you asked a pretty deep question. So.
That was a long answer. No, I appreciate it. I appreciate you giving thought to what you're saying. This is the last question. I recently saw you discourage fans from buying tickets from one of those, I won't name it, but one of those resale sites with the inflated costs. And as a person who goes to concerts, I always wonder, every time I buy a concert ticket, can't musicians do more about this like massive problem? We just saw a bunch of bots scoop up all these S&M2 tickets. Like, it's an ongoing problem.
Yeah, it's really a huge issue. I think that, and I'm certainly guilty of this, but I think that before I was a musician, I really thought that musicians were much more involved on the touring side. I mean, I get messages all the time on Instagram going, you know, I just announced a Europe tour yesterday, and I'm really excited about it. I've never been to Europe, but a lot of kids message me going, you know, why not? Why aren't you coming to Poland? Why not Romania? Why not Prague? And the answer is, I don't know. My booking agent booked this tour, and it doesn't have those countries. So as far as what I can personally do to tackle this epidemic of online resale and how you navigate, well, who's buying a ticket because they're a fan and who's buying a ticket because they know that it's going to sell out and they're going to flip those tickets for profit. I'm not really sure how you do that, but I know that Warner Music Group and my record label are certainly invested in solving that problem too. And as far as my advice to that fan, unfortunately, you know, I don't want to advise people to do anything I wouldn't do. And it's really a shame that those tickets did escalate in price like that. And the best thing I could do, to be honest, is to remind people, hey, I'm going to be back in a couple months. And
that's what you
know,
said.
Get
I was
the tickets
like,
then. And like, I'll be back. It's not like, you know, people go, oh, come back to Houston. It's like, no, I'm never coming back to Houston again. After my first show, that's it. I'm retired. So of course I'll be back in a couple months. We'll be in a bigger venue. It'll sell out, hopefully, but hopefully not as fast, and go buy a ticket then.
I totally laughed. You're like, nah, don't buy that. I'll be back. Don't worry about it. I was like, all right.
Yeah, and I know for some people it's like I'm supposed to build this mystery or intrigue so that people clamor for tickets because I imagine that's somehow good for my business. But I think the best thing for my business is to be honest with fans and to be myself. And it would feel irresponsible to pretend that like you should buy a $15 ticket for $65. It's just crazy.
I appreciate the honesty. I love that reply. All right. So I think that is a wrap for us, unless you want to mention anything else.
I'd love to. Volume 2 out now. Apologize. Out now. Getting played here on Loudwire. Pretty cool. Get involved at xxresistance.org if you're curious about how to take some of these themes from the music off of your headphones and into the streets. I'm going to be back real soon with some new music and some new fun stuff, and don't go anywhere.
Awesome. Beautiful. Thank you, Jordan Grandson. Thank you so much for your time, man. Always appreciate it.